bring on our first presenter. Our first presenter is Dr. Anthony Hamilton, and he will set the tune for this two-day symposium. Dr. Anthony Hamilton has more than 30 years of experience in the field of business management and administrative operations. Dr. Hamilton's life work has included professional service in the area of cooperative development with credit unions, producer and supplier cooperatives, domestic and international charter, commuter aviation operations, legislative development, and civil society advocacy as the current president of Civil Society Bahamas. He's the current director of administration at Southern Air Charter Company Limited, SACCL, president of the Bahamas Association of Air Transport Operators, BATO, president of Haulover Investments Company Limited, vice chairman of Airline Operators Council at the Linden International Airport, member of Ministry of Tourism Aviation Council, and director of Ride Bahamas Transportation Company. A Justice of the Peace for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Dr. Hamilton holds a doctorate, master's, and a bachelor's of theology degree from Christian Life School of Theology, Columbus, Georgia, USA, an associate of arts degree in business administration from the College of the Bahamas, a business diploma from the University of Wisconsin Graduate School, and a trade union education law diploma from the University of the West Indies Trade Union Congress, Bahamas. Also, what I failed to mention earlier, Dr. Hamilton is also the chairman and administrator of the Correctional Service Review Board. And he's married to Mrs. Valderrain Hamilton, an associate professor at the University of the Bahamas, and their union has produced 3 children. Let us welcome at this time, Dr. Anthony Hamilton.
Good morning to all. And indeed, I'm privileged to have this opportunity this morning to make representation on behalf of civil society, Bahamas in particular, but the civil society sector at large, with regard to potential benefit to be derived from our time together, in which we are highly anticipating that our time together will be fruitful, rewarding, inspiring, and all the other positive vibrations that we can generate during our time together. Thank you, Mr. Troy Clark and your team at Lead Institute and your fellow associates for arranging such a astute time together over these next, well, today and tomorrow. And we hope that every participant, as a matter of fact, not only hoping, but I'm pretty confident that every participant in our time together will not be the same individuals when we would have concluded. And I'm very confident of that fact. As we go into our presentation, acknowledging that it is time to break out of silos, and that's the approach I thought to take today. Time is a very important thing because it speaks to opportunity. And when we look at opportunity and recognizing that it is time to break out of silos, I'd like to draw your attention to the National Commission, as I would refer to. And I'm thinking in the national context of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, which is speaking to individuals, families, faith-based communities, nations, regions, and the world. And in this context, we're speaking to the process of transforming by way of communication. And so today, we come on the heels of the Dorian experience of the Bahamas and the COVID-19 experiences, which demands a response. And as I capture this, we're thinking positively with regard to the power of silos. Very, very important that we acknowledge the power of silos. And having acknowledged the power of silos, we recognize that there's a timing, a set timing that we break out of silos. So breaking out of silos, and we see depicted by way of the flyer, chains or shackles or handcuffs, as we might refer to them, but understanding that there's a set time for this. Even in the criminal system, you recognize that sentencing is for a set duration. And understanding that we're going to spin this with regard to the focus today on silos. As we move further in dealing with our silos, the primary objective I'd like to stress today is to facilitate our learning through an interactive, participatory environment and atmosphere. And so understanding the power of silos, we're seeking to unpack this in that way. And we're speaking specifically to leadership transformation through sacrifice and responsibility. Now, we are very much aware that none of us are perfect. And so there's work to be done in each of us. But the work is expansive because it's not only the work to be done in ourselves as individuals, but recognizing that the work that we do as individuals impact others, and simultaneously the work in others impact others still. We pay attention here to the preamble of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, preamble of our Constitution, that is, the preamble of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, which is our ideal reference guide for Bahamians. And I say ideal reference guide. When we speak of the context of the individual and moving the spectrum through to the world, we understand that there are numerous constitutions around the world which speak specifically to that nation of people, the citizenry and residents of that particular nation. In this instance, our forefathers expressed expectations for the nation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and expectations of the citizenry and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I thought to put this statement right in the forefront, that all of us would have the benefit of it as Bahamians, first and foremost. But we understand we have our fellow Caribbean brothers and sisters participating with us today, and you're not to be left out. We're thinking of this in a broad context. More specifically for the Bahamians, we'd say there's a question: who is a Bahamian? And when we look at the process of forward movement, upward, onward, together, I'd like to leave this definition with you. Who is a Bahamian? An individual or individuals who demonstrate the spirit of unity with Bahamian values and practices, the principles of the spiritual, socioeconomic, and cultural identification of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, wherever they are found in the world. And I'm satisfied to say that we have Bahamians the length and breadth of the earth. It's amazing sometimes when you travel or you encounter experiences in different forums that you'd often find a Bahamian or two in the mix. And that speaks well for the nation, understanding that not only at home, but abroad, we have strong representation. If you look in numerous arenas or sectors around the world right now, we have prominent Bahamians taking their rightful place in that regard. And I trust today, our time being spent together would spark even a greater focus to that end. As we continue further, I want to draw your attention to what I refer to as the concept of Judah and Tamar, speaking to our stakeholdership. Further in our presentation, we'll be referencing the fact that we're gatekeepers, and I want you to bear that terminology in mind. In this instance, we're speaking of family and some dynamics that happen in the family, which we'll emphasize a bit further as we proceed, but I want you to pay special attention to two words: pleasure and responsibility. With pleasure, we have desire that's embedded there, but desire progresses to willingness. Willingness progresses to intimacy, and intimacy progresses to pregnancy. With regard to responsibility, we speak to choice. Here again, we have a progressive process of choice, challenge, decision, and test. And when we look at this and we capture this, we have a pregnancy test. And this is the reason that we draw reference to it is time. You know, pregnancy has a time frame to it. Oftentimes we are on time, sometimes we are not. It may be pre or even post the time that was actually established. But I want you to capture this particular frame with these two words: it's a pregnancy test. And truly, our nation has been tested, the world has been tested with regard to in particular regarding the COVID experience. But as we would have experienced around the world, weather patterns, climate change, and the likes, it's impacting all of us. Speaking to silos again, and we'll be more definitive for this with regard to the Bahamas, the Caribbean, the region, and the world. But I want you to pay attention to this, the progressive process of pleasure and responsibility. In the concept of Judah and Tamar, we had a lopsided situation where pleasure was the order of the day and responsibility was discarded. An individual actually lost his life because of discarding responsibility and hanging on to pleasure. In leadership, we often have this challenge where persons, we often refer to it as the limelight, love the limelight, and that's all for the most part that happens. But when it comes to productivity and a results-oriented approach is often lacking. In business, we refer to that process as planning, organizing, implementing, and then evaluating. And oftentimes we leave that latter portion out of the equation. Many times, lack of evaluation spells death for individuals, organizations, yea, countries, because of failure to follow through the process in a balanced fashion. We move further to a working definition, speaking to silos. And I indicated earlier that I want to be interactive, so I'm going to go through this, and then we'd allow a time for questions and some answers for a bit of interaction, given the time span we have to work with. In the first instance, silo, a tall tower or pit on a farm used to store grains. Secondly, an underground chamber in which a guide missile is kept ready for firing. Very interesting definitions there, but I'd like to take this in the context of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, in this instance, is our national silo. We are fortunate to be in a location where we have 700 islands, rocks, and keys, and we often are very quick to say not all inhabited. But the fact is, this is our jurisdiction, 700 islands, rocks, and keys, lots of water. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas, in this instance, is our national silo. We have numerous islands, from the north down deep in the south, central, and in each of these, they are unique. And that's something we want to emphasize with regard to silos. Silos are very unique. There's an exercise being conducted right now in the civil society sector by Civil Society Bahamas and partners in mapping out the civil society sector. And that's a critical deficiency that we're trying to correct, because oftentimes we have numerous entities functioning as NGOs, CSOs, but oftentimes they're very challenged, and they run from the mom and pop straight on up to very organized, large organizations. And we can speak to that with regard to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Some of our islands are more populated, more advanced than others, but all of them have a special contribution to make. And I often say here too that every citizen and resident of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas has a contribution to make, a vital and critical contribution to make that he or she alone can make. And an opportunity must be provided for that to happen. As we progress, moving to our next slide with a working definition, we capsule it in this sense. It's a spiritual, socioeconomic empowerment administrative system of people, places, and things to maximize the benefits of time, money, and relationships. And I often refer to this as the primary resources. Time, money, and relationships, very critical. There's a timing for everything, and money is a fuel in order that you'd have healthy relationships. We move a bit further, speaking to the power of silos and the network influence with regard to unity. And this is most critical. People are the most important assets and investments of our nation. Very, very critical. But as we made mention earlier with regard to the Great Commission, in this context, we're speaking to individuals, we're speaking to families, we're speaking to faith-based communities, we're speaking to the nation, we're speaking to regions, and we're speaking to the world, because people are indeed the most important assets and investments of our nation, our nations, yea, around the world. People are the most important. You know, one of the very salient things about this is the fact that when we think of it in a spiritual context, Christ died for us. And that's most critical because it demonstrates how critically important we are, how valuable we are. And therefore, in this context, we ought to always be respectful of each other and always desiring to work together. And that's often a very serious challenge because in the mix of that is influence and unity. Very, very critical. If we can have the proper and adequate influences with unity, there's nothing that will stop us. And we have that demonstrated in the Tower of Babel experience, where it actually provoked God to come down and see what the people are doing. So again, we emphasize how critically important an asset people are and as an investment. Our next frame, we'd be speaking to the foundation and the root system. And this speaks to sameness and differences. Again, we're emphasizing people here because the reality of it is there are groups of us that come together because of some common means. However, each of us are different. But when we manage these differences to complement the other person, we have amazing results. And primary in the midst of this is the volunteerism. And in the civil society sector in particular, volunteerism is a major, major, major ingredient. And we see this coming home as the nation experiencing the Dorian and the COVID experience, calling on the network of NGOs and CSOs, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, which we use interchangeably. But it is through the volunteerism in a lot of instances that we are indeed achieving the kind of results as a nation that we are. And I might mention here too, this is another exercise being pursued by the civil society sector, speaking to engaging the citizenry and residents of our nation with regard to volunteerism. You know too, recently there was a Governor General initiative with regard to volunteerism, and again emphasizing how critically important people are concerning our nation as assets and investments. It's very critical in this process of dealing with people that agreement, which we note here, we have two sets of agreements here, one in error and one for good. That is oftentimes the challenge with sameness and differences, because people are different. And we have different objectives. We have different things that would cause us to be incentivized. And so we need to manage these things, and that flows into the big picture. As a nation, as a family, progressively again, as an individual, the individual needs to be properly aligned in order that he or she can maximize the benefits as an individual and to be able to make the appropriate requisite deposits into our society, into the family, into the various organizations or entities of our nation. And so we need agreement. Now, it's important that we recognize error agreements and translate those into agreement for good. And so the big picture would be to bring that to bear, understanding that every one of us has a contribution critically important to the well-being of our nation at large. And so for the foundation, it's important that we value the importance of people. And secondly, the root system regarding the relationships, the interactivity with regard to individuals by way of relationships in our society. As we move further, we'd come to accountability. And in this instance, we're speaking a three-faceted approach here: the cry, the call, and the response. And we take some time and just walk through these individually. In the first instance, the cry, and even as we are spending these 2 days together, there was a reason for that to happen. And I'd like to liken that to the fact that there's a cry or a need. The need that provoked Mr. Clark and others to come together in this way to foster this environment and atmosphere that we're actually working with today and continuing into tomorrow. So the cry, speaking to need. But I'd like to undergird this by emphasizing that there's the legal environment of truth, speaking to vision. That's what we're actually manifesting today and in the day following tomorrow with regard to coming to a structured collaboration process. But one must have vision in order to initiate this process. And so I'd like to here again acknowledge the initiative being taken to foster this environment, to encourage recognition, identification of needs, and to be able to facilitate solutions to those needs by way of this initiative of these 2 days of coming together as people that are valuable and important to the well-being of others and ourselves. The next step would be the call. And this is speaking to specifically to individuals that are gifted and talented, equipped to execute the tasks, the function, the job. And in this instance, we're referring to law being the legal authority working. Order, we're speaking to order. And this is the, acknowledging, recognizing the mandate which we flow into in terms of a mission. And the vision is being able to see, to hear, and having an understanding of the direction that you want to head in. And then we engage others to help us to fulfill it. That's what's happening today. We are seeking to spark, provoke, encourage, challenge individuals to join forces in being able to address the needs or the cry in our respective nations. As we acknowledge, this session is being conducted live, and therefore other individuals around the world, as it were, would be able to participate. But again, the constant is that we have people in each of these instances, each jurisdiction, each territory, each nation, each region, yea, the world. And the principle is the same, needing vision and needing mission to be executed. And finally, the response aspect of this. Understanding that when we walk through those two initial processes, we come to what I refer to as God, and in this instance is an acronym of going out and dominating. Going out and dominating. And this is speaking to stewardship. It's very critical that our environment would foster the opportunity for excellent stewardship. And this entails training, re-education, training and development, as we refer to it in another context. It's a process that all of us must be engaged in. None of us know everything, and therefore all of us need each other. We need somebody else to complement those giftings and talents that we would possess as individuals, because we don't have everything. And so when we link them properly, we get the kind of excellent results that we ought to achieve as an individual. You get to be satisfied in being able to find yourself fulfilled. And as you fulfilled and helping others to find their way and be fulfilled likewise, now we have, which emerges as a team, emerging to a family, emerging to communities, emerging to a nation, emerging to regions, and yet the world. As we progress with this process, we go to examples of silo systems networking. And I'd like to emphasize it's an holistic, practical, and relevant environment and atmosphere that we're seeking to foster by way of the National Great Commission. And I say national in the context of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We're going to be walking into a diagram that we break out in a bit, speaking to 2 bites at the cherry. And as we speak to the National Commission, we have the civil society sector, we have the business community, we have the government of the Bahamas in this context for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. But in each of the respective countries, nations around the world, these 3 components interact to cause us to succeed or to fail. And I'd like to refer to this, as I mentioned earlier, 2 bites at the cherry, speaking of tripartite governance. That's exactly what we're seeking to depict here. As we move further, in the next slide, we speak to examples of silos networking in a more definitive way. And I referred to this as referenced earlier, 2 bites at the cherry. And what are we speaking to? You take note of the blue area of civil society, which speaks to the citizenry and residents. As voters, they're citizens and voters, but they're also taxpayers. Very, very critical in this process. They're voters and taxpayers. When we move to the second inner circle, we'd be speaking to the business community, which is speaking to taxpayers and voters. It flips a bit, because the businesses generate a healthy exercise in terms of the taxes that we collect by virtue of trade and commerce in our respective societies. When we move to the outer circle of the government, we have tax collectors and dispensers of the tax on behalf of the citizenry and residents of the nation. Very, very important interactive process. We referenced 2 bites of the cherry. Here goes your second bite. In the first instance, as citizens and residents, you're the voters and taxpayers. In the outer circle, as we notice the circle giving the depiction of the CSOs, we're speaking about the gatekeepers. Here we go with the gatekeepers, because now this is your second bite of the cherry. When we would have gone through the electoral process, facilitating leadership by way of the government for your respective nations, countries, we have the gatekeepers being the people, and in this instance, the civil society sector by virtue of specialization with the various NGOs, CSOs, become the gatekeepers because they are the individuals actually on the ground, experiencing, feeling, touching the impact of how governance is actually operated within the nation. And in this instance, we have various sectors for NGOs that are functioning in respective sectors, environmentally, governance, and the likes. All sorts of things. The feeding process, as we note in our country right now, that NGOs are heavily inundated with regard to the feeding process, in some instances, even regarding housing for homeless individuals and the likes. And in the economic climate right now, a great deal of that type of assistance is being dealt with. And we be aware that by virtue of grant funding, a number of these things are actually executed to produce a healthy society and being able to respond to crisis as far as the nation is concerned. I'd like to move to our next slide, speaking to the how silos networking with regard to covenant and contract. These are 2 processes with regard to how things approach. And I'm speaking here specifically to the spiritual and the natural aspect of this, because we're speaking to balance. In the spiritual context, we're speaking to covenant. In the contractual context, we're speaking to an actual legal contract. And in this instance, what we have is that in a contract, you have built in an out clause. In a covenant instance, there's no out clause. And we have this mix in our society, and we go back to the desire and choice. When we speak of the contract, we recognize that, as we said, the out clause is they're given for conflict resolution. In a covenant, there's no out clause because there's a serious commitment that's akin to a marriage, even though we have divorce situations that would occur. But the original intent is that you are cemented in this relationship, making sacrifice to the benefit of each individual and the wider body in terms of offspring or outgrowth, whether it be an organization for expansion and the likes. But you're committed straight through to the end. And oftentimes we have challenges because of desire having a being the dominant factor. And that leads to a number of things that it takes us into what we refer to as the 3 sins of failure and the 3 blessings of good success. And I'll expand that here in light of the fact that when we speak to the 3 sins of failure, we're speaking to selfishness, we're speaking to unfairness, and we're speaking to injustices. On the reverse of that, we speak to selflessness, we speak to fairness, and we speak to justice. And that's very critical for a successful exercise, being able to recognize and identify failures, and also aspiring to engender good success in our efforts. Going back to vision, which is important in this process because it is a process, and I refer to this in light of the fact that it's a workable, practical process of being able to achieve good success. So we speak to the vision, being able to see, to hear, to be able to articulate that, and position those that are following to be able to go and do, which produces the manifestation, which in turn is executing and returning to validate that you've executed correctly and properly. And that engenders a legacy, which is speaking to ownership. In essence, once your system and the foundation has been established and is working, it engenders a legacy. And I think all of us would like to have a healthy, vibrant, productive, and profitable legacy. And so the time spent as we are seeking to lay the foundation for a further time in the session, we want to ensure that you will grasp the fact that vision is necessary, which we are actually participating now. And the mission is, as we flesh this out, to see manifestation, in essence, see good success results as a result of the time that we will spend together over these 2 days, and engendering a legacy, in essence, having something established that we'd all be proud of, to be owners and participants in it, preserving it with resilience and sustainability. And that's very important in the context of what we've experienced with the Dorian experiences and also the current COVID experience as we walk through this process, bearing this in mind that we provide proper leadership in this process. To review this process, then we have in our next slide, the review of Silos Network. And as we emphasized earlier, it is time to break out the silos. Now, silos are very important in that it's your planning, it's your organizing, it's your towards your implementation, and also then the evaluation process, which is ongoing. When I refer to it is time, I'm speaking to the fact that we've been doing a lot of talking for a long time in the nation, and you would have been talking quite a bit in your respective families and various entities that you've been a part of. But there's always a time when it's necessary to break out of those silos. So the silos serves its purpose, excuse me, in that it allows you to solidify your vision, your mission, and then we progress in terms of manifestation, and we progress further towards the legacy. So silos has its purpose, but there's always a time when it's necessary to break out of those silos and allow the wider community, the wider nation, the world to be able to experience it. Secondly, we have the primary objective, which we spoke to inclusion and consultation, and I referenced that in terms of allowing an opportunity for questions and answers. I'm going to emphasize the preamble of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It's a guide for us in terms of our way forward, and we reference our forefathers having expectations not only of the nation, but of the people, the residents, and the citizenry and residents of the nation. And that engenders pleasure with responsibility. We ought to have a pride in the nation as citizenry and residents of this nation to want to see the nation perform at its best. Our national silo then would be the Commonwealth, which would be our boundary, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and not Nassau-centric, but impacting the entire nation from the north straight down to the south, covering everything in between as our silo, and ensuring that all of the cylinders in the respective silos are actually functioning, that we'd be able to break out and speak to the world. So hence we have the process of the cry, the call, and the response. We don't only hear the cry, but we must take responsibility with our respective giftings to respond to that cry and reap the results. So then we'd have made investments and we look for the return on the investments. And right about here, I want to open the floor so that we can have some questions and answers, given the time constraints. And Mr. Clark, I'd be guided by you with regard to the allocation of that time frame to accommodate a few questions and answers.
Let me first pose this question to you, Dr. Hamilton. As it relates to civil society, and I saw your diagram with 2 bites at the cherry.
Right.
How can civil society, a non-governmental organization, be effective in its carrying out its mission and vision when you have governmental agencies having their mission and their vision, and the two might come into conflict with one another?
Excellent. Excellent question. And right away off the top, what you sparked for me was reference to the National Development Plan. There's a document that's the result of massive contributions across the nation, massive dollars across the nation. And the reason I'm going in that direction, because the operative thing here is agreement. We have, speaking to silos and breaking out silos. Remember, we referred to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as a silo?
Right.
And what we're speaking to, the purpose of a silo is to make sure that, for instance, let's use the body as an example. You have kidneys, you have a liver, you have a heart, you have lungs, you have different limbs. But if they're not aligned properly, you in for a hell of a lot of problems. And to respond to your question, it's imperative that communication for transformation happens between the government and the citizenry and residents of the nation. And that diagram was captured to depict exactly that, how critically important it is for the interactive, respectful dialogue, inclusion and consultation that's necessary for each of those NGOs and CSOs to be successful. I venture to say this, that the absence of NGOs and CSOs in our nation during the midst of a Dorian and a COVID-19 experience is a catastrophe. The fact is, they exist and they are performing, and to respond further to your question, they can be performing better. And I would trust that this particular exercise we're going through regard to this two-day process is going to help to spiral this into the proper alignment that we can reap the results and proper benefits from it. Excellent question.
Thank you.
I think one of the things we really sought to do here is to spark great thinking in the midst of us. You're going to come into new information during the process of the presentations being made, but the fact is, once that new information comes to you, you now have some responsibility for it. We spoke to desire, and we spoke to choice, we spoke to pleasure, and we spoke to responsibility. All of those components are actually in the mix. What you have right now, there's a chemistry that's actually taking place. There's a synergy that's actually taking place. And as Mr. Clark would have indicated at the top of our opening process, this exercise is not an exercise of failure, but it's an exercise for good success. And I'm expecting that we will have good success as a result of the time and the contributions of the various presenters during the course of the two-day period, and your panel exchange likewise, that you'll be able to solidify some positive things that we can take ownership of, which would be a legacy formulating over these 2 days with ownership and taking responsibility as citizens of this nation. And for the persons in other nations, we hope this would incentivize you to do likewise in your respective jurisdiction.
Thank you very much for your most timely presentation, Dr. Hamilton. And hopefully you're able to join us as one of the panelists tomorrow evening for that 55-minute segment. We'll have a different crew of persons on along with the same crew here tomorrow. And we want to be able to dissect how we can collaborate and put together the goals and the objectives of this two-day symposium. Once again, thank you for your timely information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark and your team, for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to rendering any further assistance that I'm able to.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're most welcome.